Well, hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is TNC in Massachusetts webinar series that connects you with science, influencers, and our partners from New England and around the world. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Deb Markowitz, the State Director of TNC in Massachusetts, and your host. You may know this already, but here at the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, we're dedicated to creating a healthier world for all. We work locally and globally using innovative science and scalable, long-lasting solutions to tackle the most complex environmental challenges facing our warming planet. We know that what we do here in Massachusetts to protect nature will mean a better future for all of us. We've got a really exciting program for you today. We're going to be chatting with Andy Finton, TNC and Massachusetts Conservation Ecologist, and Dr. Eve Schluter, MassWildlife's Assistant Director for the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. We're going to be talking about a new tool, or a tool that's been around that's being updated, called BioMap. It's a climate-smart and dynamic conservation planning blueprint for state agencies, land trusts, and municipalities. Our speakers are going to tell us how BioMap's vision, tools, and map provide conservation decision makers the information they need to protect lands and waters that are most critical for staving off biodiversity loss and helping to ensure both plant and animal species in Massachusetts are thriving, even as our climate changes. Before we dive into today's program, I wanted to share a little bit about our guests. Dr. Everose, or Eve Schluter, received her degree in biology and literature from Claremont McKenna College, and then a PhD in biology from Tufts University. Before, she was Assistant Director at MassWildlife for the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. She was the Assistant Director of the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Office at the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. We call that the EEA's office. She previously also served as the Chief of Regulatory Review for MassWildlife. Andy Finton is TNC in Massachusetts Conservation Ecologist. His expertise is in forest ecology and landscape analysis. He works collaboratively with land trusts, public agencies, and academic partners to identify conservation priorities and to conserve important landscapes across New England. He's got a BS in plant sciences from Cornell and a master's in forest ecology from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. If you think of questions for Eve and Andy, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And I just want to thank you all again for joining us, and let's dive in to the panelists.
Great, thank you for that introduction. I'm just going to start sharing my screen, and please let me know that that's working properly.
If you just launch it, we can, yep, that looks perfect.
Okay, great. Great, thank you everyone. I'm excited to be here this afternoon. I guess it's after 12. We are here to talk to you about a really exciting project that's going to be launching soon. BioMap. Many of you may know about the previous iterations, but we're really excited to show you this next version of BioMap. Just to give you a little bit of background of our agency, I work for MassWildlife, and we're responsible for the conservation of freshwater fish and wildlife in the Commonwealth. And that includes our most imperiled species, our endangered plants and animals. And we work to restore, protect, and manage land for wildlife to thrive and for people to enjoy. We have several core functions. Those include monitoring and managing and restoring our species and habitats across the Commonwealth, as well as we work on land protection, which is a critical component to maintaining biodiversity. And currently we have over 226,000 acres that are protected in our wildlife management areas. We also have a very strong outdoor recreation component. This includes hunting and fishing, as well as things like bird watching and wildlife viewing or watching. We have a lot that we do on education and outreach. Some of what we're going to be talking about today, obviously, but there are many other areas that we work in. And I strongly encourage you to reach out to us and to follow us on our social media if you aren't already, because there's a lot of information that we can provide about Massachusetts and everything that we work on and our natural areas. And then finally, we have a very strong regulation component. We are the agency responsible for the management of our Commonwealth's wildlife resources. And so we obviously implement various regulations, including our state Endangered Species Act. MassWildlife's conservation priorities are set by our State Wildlife Action Plan. This is a plan that is required by Congress, and every state has one, and it in Massachusetts presents the 570 species that are considered of greatest conservation need. And this includes our most rare and imperiled species, ones that are officially listed under our Endangered Species Act as endangered, threatened, or of special concern, as well as other vulnerable species. The SWAP, as we call it, also identifies 24 habitat types that support these species and lays out the actions that are necessary to conserve them. The last swap was done in 2015, and it's required to be updated every 10 years. So the next update will be coming soon in 2025. And the work that we've done on BioMap and are going to be presenting today is really going to be critical to updating that State Wildlife Action Plan and will help inform our conservation actions. The Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program actually got its start with the Nature Conservancy. It was established in 1978. It's officially been part of MassWildlife since the early 80s. In our program, we work on protecting the state's native biological diversity, but we have a particular emphasis that we place on our rare species and those that are officially listed under the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act. Currently, we have, as you can see here, 173 animals on the list, as well as 259 plants. And these are listed at different levels of vulnerability, depending on various factors, such as threats and long-term persistence. And they can be listed as either endangered, threatened, or of special concern. In our work to protect these species, we have several different conservation tools that we use. A key tool that we're going to be talking about today, obviously, is land protection. We work very hard within the agency and the Department of Fish and Game, as well as with our conservation partners, to secure land for long-term biodiversity protection and persistence. We also do a lot of work around planning and education. That's a small little map of BioMap 2. And today's talk is really going to be talking about that area of our work. We also have an extremely large data set that we manage, various different sources of data. And we use this information to help guide our conservation efforts, as well as really determine which species and habitats are in greatest need of conservation efforts. I already mentioned our regulatory review component. In Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program, we work to implement the Mass Endangered Species Act, and there is a review component associated with that. We also review development projects and other activities for impacts to state listed species under several different state laws and regulations, including the Wetlands Protection Act and this Forest Cutting Practices Act. And finally, we have a large number of staff that work very tirelessly on habitat management and ecological restoration. And we'll be talking about that in a little bit. So I think it's important to kind of set the big picture here, why we're working on all these different pieces to protect biodiversity. It really is a matter of biodiversity being in crisis at the local, at the global, the national, and the state scale. According to the National Wildlife Federation's 2018 report, 1/3 of species in the United States right now are considered to be vulnerable, and 1/5 are at high risk of extinction. We have over 1,600 species that are officially listed on the Federal Endangered Species Act, and over 12,000 species have been identified as species of greatest conservation need in the various SWAPs across the nation. As I mentioned, we have 432 species that are currently listed in Massachusetts. We are seeing a lot of different reasons why biodiversity is experiencing this crisis. The primary impacts include habitat loss and fragmentation, as well as the emergence of new threats from invasive species, diseases, and other such factors. And all of these are being these stressors are being compounded by climate change. The recent UN climate report that was released recognizes the interdependence of climate, ecosystems, biodiversity, and human society. And in order to reverse any of these trends, there really is a need for urgent action. So this is where BioMap enters the picture. We see BioMap as a map, a tool, and a vision. We have a very long history in Massachusetts of being a leader in this type of conservation effort, with BioMap coming out in 2001, followed by Living Waters in 2003, and BioMap 2 being released in 2010. These really are groundbreaking conservation tools that have provided a framework for protection and stewardship of lands and waters that are critical for biodiversity conservation. They're extremely trusted at this point and very credible based on lots of different data, and they've been heavily utilized for years now. And with this current iteration of BioMap, we really are hoping to further promote and catalyze partnerships and allow multiple partner organizations to coordinate their efforts as it relates to biodiversity conservation. So why are we working on another BioMap? Well, as I mentioned, the last BioMap is over 10 years old, so we have a lot of additional information and new sources of information that we wanted to incorporate. We also wanted to build on the legacy and really work to guide future conservation planning and landscape protection. And this will allow and facilitate landscape scale thinking for conservation actions. We really think that this is important to guide conservation into the future, and we're looking to build a shared vision. So now you're going to get a sneak peek behind the curtain, as they say. We're going to talk you through what's new in this next iteration of BioMap. As I already mentioned, it incorporates updated information on native biodiversity and habitats. It presents data at multiple scales. This is something that we're very excited about. One of the things that we have heard from people utilizing the last version of BioMap is that it's important to the users to understand what resources are critical in their areas, both whether they're important at the state level or whether they're important within their local area or municipality. So we worked really hard to try and present data at multiple scales, and I'll go through that in a minute. We're also addressing climate change threats, and Andy is going to be talking about that. And then we'll come back to me and I'll talk about how in this version of BioMap, we're going to be providing information for practitioners on habitat management and restoration. And then finally, it really is an innovative approach where we're providing all this information in a new state-of-the-art interactive web interface. So some of you may be familiar with BioMap already. One thing that I wanted to say is that we are pulling a lot of elements from BioMap 2 into this new iteration. So as in BioMap 2, BioMap has two main elements. It has core habitat, which identifies the areas that are critical for the long-term persistence of rare and vulnerable species, as well as a wide diversity of natural communities and intact ecosystems. We also identify critical natural landscapes, which identify large landscape blocks that provide habitat for wide-ranging native species. They support intact ecological processes and maintain connectivity among habitats, as well as enhance ecological resilience. And each of these elements is made up of several components that you can look at individually based on rare species, habitats, forest interiors, river streams, and wetlands and coastal areas. So now I'm just going to briefly walk you through how we're presenting some of the information at different scales. As I had mentioned, BioMap has set priorities for statewide conservation. And one of the things that we've heard over the years is that there's interest in understanding these resources at a more local level. So we did two things differently here with the scaling for BioMap. First off, we decided that it was not only important to look at priorities at a statewide scale, but it's also important to look at how there might be priorities within the Commonwealth that are critical for regional conservation efforts. So we present, for example, in these data on rare species, in BioMap 2, the blue areas show the areas that are critical for statewide conservation. In this next iteration of BioMap, the green areas, or the blue areas, sorry, show the global, and then the green areas show the statewide conservation. So I'll just go back and show you that the blue areas are considered important at the regional level. And then if you go to the data that are displayed at the statewide level, you can see additional areas turn on for priorities for conservation. Furthermore, if you're interested in working at the local level, you can see here that there are some municipalities that may not have either global or regional statewide conservation targets. So we decided to work on providing some data for the various municipalities so that they could do some more localized efforts to protect state listed species and their habitats within their town boundaries. So now I'm going to turn it over to Andy.
Great. Thank you, Eve. And thanks, Deb, for your introductions. As I jump in, I want to emphasize 2 points. One, the importance of the Nature Conservancy's decade-long collaboration and partnership with MassWildlife and the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program. We are collaborating, as Eve will show you in just a minute, on habitat restoration and management. We have a long history of collaborating on land protection and on developing conservation science like the BioMap. We started this project, Eve and I, and a much broader team in the summer and fall of 2019. And like everyone else, we soon got hit with COVID and moved from meeting in Westboro at MassWildlife headquarters to virtual. And we've been able to manage data, develop websites, edit documents all through Zoom and virtually. And it's a testament, I'll make a very public appreciation of Eve that we have probably 6 to 8 Zoom meetings a week now, and I look forward to each and every one because it's so wonderful to work with Eve and her team. The other thing I want to emphasize is that BioMap, as Eve mentioned, is a trusted product with a 21-year history that's used by the state agencies, municipalities, and land trusts as the key data source for habitat information. All those entities protect land for a variety of reasons, but BioMap is the go-to document and data set, and those entities spend tens of millions of dollars each year on land conservation, influenced by BioMap. So it's got a very high impact, which is why we're putting so much effort into it. Next slide, please, Eve. So picking up from where Eve left off on her presentation of rare species, Massachusetts has a wide variety of habitats, from sandy dunes on Cape Cod to rocky outcrops on Mount Greylock and everything in between. And as a result, we have a tremendous diversity of plants and animals. For instance, in Massachusetts alone, we have over 2,000 native plant species. Next slide. As well as diverse wildlife, 45 reptile and amphibian species, about 200 breeding bird species, about 100 mammal species, as well as fish, freshwater mussels, insects, mosses, fungi, etc. And when we talk about biodiversity, it's more than the number of species as well. Biodiversity includes the genetic diversity among species populations. Biodiversity is defined as including the dynamic, ecological, and even evolutionary processes that occur across our state. And we're trying to protect all of that and represent all of that in BioMap. Next slide, please, Eve. Eve mentioned the components of biodiversity, and in addition to the rare species that Eve laid out, we're adding components that capture intact forests, forest interior habitat, large connected landscapes, and high quality wetlands. Next slide, please. So also, as Eve mentioned, we've got some big opportunities for conservation in Massachusetts, as well as some challenges. So for context, Massachusetts has 3 million acres of forest. That's about 60% of the state, and thousands of miles of rivers and streams, as well as about 500,000 acres of wetlands. And but we're up against a challenge. Next slide, please, Eve. So we've also got about 50,000 miles of roads in Massachusetts and other developed areas. And along with other threats, these are all working together to undermine the integrity of our natural lands. Next slide. So these also work in synergy with the impacts of climate change and with things like invasive insects and diseases that affect our forests and other communities. This is that little bright green insect is an emerald ash borer, which unfortunately is decimating our native ash trees. So we've got a lot of opportunity with still intact natural lands, but a lot of challenges in face of it, and that's where BioMap comes in. We're trying to identify the places most important to maintain that integrity. And next slide, please, Eve. That's where resilience comes in as well. Resilience, one definition, the capacity to adjust to and recover from disturbance and difficulty. I like this definition because obviously it has applications to this project and to ecosystems and species populations. But when you think about our own lives, especially in the last 2 years, we realize that resilience is a concept that applies to not only ecosystems and species, but people and communities as well. And we're deliberately building climate resilience into BioMap. Next slide. One way we're doing that is to incorporate the Nature Conservancy's resilience analysis into BioMap. So I'm going to take us one step away, one slide, to give you a quick thumbnail of what that means by the Nature Conservancy's resilience analysis. And the analysis was pioneered in the Northeast about 15 years ago, and the project has continued. And in the last 3 years, the Nature Conservancy thought it was so important, we expanded that analysis across the entire continental United States. And what you're looking at is an analysis of places that support species in a changing climate. They provide options to species in that context. The green areas are those areas that have more microclimates and connectivity among them, which allow plants and animals to move and to more suitable habitats during climate extremes and under the impacts of long-term change. And this helps ensure that habitats will stand the test of time and support wildlife and plants into the future, which will also ensure that our conservation investments are going to pay off over the long run. So next slide, back to our BioMap components. This is a satellite photo, not unlike what you might see on Google Maps or another app. And this is showing one of many landscape blocks in Massachusetts, one of our components. And landscape blocks are a mosaic of forests, wetlands, rivers, lakes, and other habitats. This block is in the Berkshires. It's 13,000 acres, and these landscapes are intact and connected enough to allow a wide variety of plants and animals to flourish. They allow and support wide-ranging species like black bear and moose, and they're dynamic, and they support dynamic and evolving ecosystems now and into the future. And we used a combination of an ecological integrity data from UMass Amherst researchers, as well as the Nature Conservancy's resilience data to define these landscape blocks. When we zoom out, Eve, next slide, please. We see a cluster of these landscape blocks in central Massachusetts. And these landscape blocks were developed from a statewide perspective. So we wanted the most intact and large examples of these mosaics of forest, wetland, rivers, et cetera, across the state. But again, this is from a statewide perspective. And this clearly shows that not every town in the Commonwealth had areas large and intact enough to meet the criteria for these statewide landscape blocks. But we know that every town has some intact landscape at different scales, even if it doesn't meet these large statewide thresholds. So we wanted every town to understand where those places were to support local decision-making to augment the data developed from a statewide perspective. So next slide, please, Eve. So we added this new feature, very analogous to the local species data that Eve presented, to help with local decision-making. So local landscapes in light green now are modeled after landscape blocks, but customized to each municipality. And we see many more communities with relevant data to their local planning and priorities. And we built these analogs for, as Eve said, rare species, for these local landscapes, for wetlands, rivers and streams, and vernal pools as well. So my final slide before handing it back to Eve is a reminder that we were talking a lot about habitat and biodiversity, but these places that are identified in BioMap are also critical to our own well-being. These lands and waters provide us with a range of benefits, including cleaning the water we drink, purifying the air we breathe, pulling carbon out of the atmosphere to mitigate climate change, absorbing floodwaters, providing recreational opportunities for us, all of which bolster our own resilience, our health and well-being. I like to say that these places are not nice to have, they're must have. And with that, I'm gonna give it back to Eve to point out where we're heading with BioMap and then open it up to your questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Andy. So I think it's important to recognize that, we've made some significant strides in the Commonwealth in terms of land protection and working to conserve biodiversity. But more and more, land protection alone is not enough. There are many species and habitat types that require active management. And so there are stewardship actions that are going to be really critical for habitat resilience, to work to restore ecological processes and to prepare for, recover from, and adapt to climate change. Through BioMap and this new interactive web interface, we're going to be providing a set of online tools to help BioMap users locate, prioritize, develop, and implement management and restoration, and focus on nature-based solutions. We are pulling this information together to make sure that we complement ongoing projects at the state and regional level. And we really see this as a resource clearinghouse that can grow over time as new tools and information is developed. So I'm going to briefly just show a video that I think is pretty spectacular of a recent management effort that was conducted out on Katama Airfield and Katama Plains Wildlife Management Area. This is a prescribed fire. There was a lot of work that had to go into planning this and implementing it. And we burned about 60 acres with the help of, it was MassWildlife, the Nature Conservancy, the Mass DCR, Edgartown and Chilmark towns, the Mass Army National Guard, and the Martha's Vineyard Land Bank. So it really was a strong partnership and effort. We burned about 60 acres, and this work will help to meet sandplain, grassland, and heathland restoration efforts that benefit wildlife and native plants. And as you can see, this footage is pretty incredible to show how the work was done in achieving those goals. So moving on to what you can expect when BioMap launches, we're going to have several products. We're going to have a web interface, which has a lot of information on what BioMap is, how to use it, what the various components will be. But most importantly, it will have the interactive map that will allow you to investigate the data. There's going to be a series of story maps that will walk you through all the information. You'll be able to download the data. You're going to have access to that habitat management and restoration clearinghouse, as well as additional information. And of course, there'll be a technical report with more detail on how the data were compiled. And then finally, we're also going to be pulling together some print material, which includes a longer glossy report, as well as some individual page pamphlet. So how do you use BioMap, and what is BioMap really meant to guide? BioMap is really, as we said at the beginning, a map and a tool and a vision. We believe that it will help with local, regional, and statewide conservation efforts, everything from land protection to habitat management and restoration, as well as assisting with planning for example, municipal open space plans and grant development to help fund some of these efforts. This type of information can also be used for identifying particular zoning, as well as development of local bylaws to protect various resources. We also hope that this will facilitate collaborations and increase outreach and educational opportunities. We believe that this information will be relevant to all communities, and we see this really as a living project. There's going to be opportunities for additional data and analyses moving forward, and we see that BioMap will be evolving over time as new information becomes available. And finally, this really goes beyond the borders of Massachusetts. BioMap, as I said in the beginning, has a very strong history, and taking it to this next step is going to help inform regional conservation efforts. And we really see this as a potential case study for a national application. And in closing, I'll just say that if successfully conserved, the vision that we've laid out with BioMap will allow the full complement of the Massachusetts plants, animals, and habitats to survive and to thrive. And side by side, with a thriving population of residents that will have ample access to nature and outdoor recreation, while we're also working to ensure a climate resilient landscape that protects our rich natural heritage and human infrastructure for now and for future generations. So thank you very much. And with that, I think I'll stop sharing.
Yeah. And let's start a little conversation. We have a lot of questions from the audience. I have to say, it's such a thrilling, it's just thrilling to see this tool and how it's developed, hear the story behind it. You may know I was the head of the Natural Resource Agency in Vermont, and we developed a similar product while I was there. We called it the Bio Finder. Maybe it was based on Massachusetts earlier BioMap. I don't now remember, but I know how much it helped us make our own management decisions and conservation investment decisions. So what I love about BioMap is it is taking all the science, putting it in a place that helps people make real decisions, and that it's accessible to anybody. Like once this is up, the tool will be accessible to everyone who's on today. You can take a look at where you live. You could take a look at your favorite places and see what's there. And so I'm curious about the decisions that you had to make as you were building the map. Like what's important and what's less important. And I know I really appreciate Andy's definition of resilience, and I took a note of it. It's the capacity to adjust and recover from disturbance and difficulty. And I know well the TNC approach to resilience is making sure there's a landscape that is itself resilient, like it has different microclimates, as he said, and different elevations, and the sun hits it differently, and that it's connected, so you can have that migration of species. But I would suspect that there were other things also that you were thinking about as you were building BioMap. And so, Eve, can you speak to that?
Sure. There's a lot of decisions that go into BioMap and assessing the data and pulling it together. So I'll give an example. From the rare species perspective, we collect a lot of data and have an immense database on locational information of rare species and their populations. We spend a lot of time looking at and evaluating on a species by species basis, based on the information we have, how likely those populations are to persist and what the threats are. This obviously helps us decide levels of vulnerability and listing status and so forth. But by looking at that and looking at land use, current land use within the Commonwealth, and potential barriers to movement and so forth, it allows us to prioritize which populations are perhaps most vulnerable and need the most work or effort to restore and to work towards recovery. And so that then leads into how we decide which ones to include into BioMap, because with limited conservation resources and dollars, frankly, you need to really make evaluations on how to get the biggest bang for your conservation buck. And so that's an example of one of the layers that I can talk to. And similar type efforts were done for all the layers, because not everything can be a conservation priority. It would be nice, but we need to really work to make sure that we're prioritizing appropriately.
And of course, there's other tensions, right? We want affordable housing, which means
exactly
we have a place to build it. We need to have jobs for people. So I was really impressed when I saw the overlay of all the roads and seeing that,
quite the network.
Quite the network. And it brings to mind also, when I was secretary, I had to make a really tough decision around protecting an endangered species that was found in the middle of a parking lot in the middle of an industrial park. It's like, do you say no to expanding this business in the industrial park because they found this rare lettuce or rice or something there, and for why it's disconnected? So maybe that's where the connection comes in, like having little pockets of special things disconnected doesn't really provide the ecological value. I don't know. Andy, as we were thinking about, in TNC, I mean, you've been around for a long time, and thinking about the resilience and connectivity science that underlies a lot of what BioMap is trying to do. Can you talk about where this concept came from and how it's been applied now, not just in New England, but now New England and beyond?
Sure. I've been around a long time, and I remember probably 2005 or something when our regional director, Deb, for the Nature Conservancy said, we should be paying a little more attention to climate change. And I want to make sure our investments are going to be relevant 20, 50 years from now. And so he set our colleague, Mark Anderson, who is he and his team of scientists are the founders of that science, onto the task. And that's when the R&D phase of that developed. And it's involved over 250 scientists from across the Conservancy now, and is being applied now that the data are available. We just had a workshop last week talking about it with scientists from and policy people from all over the Conservancy as they work, as we are here in Massachusetts, with their state agencies, with their federal agencies, with their land trusts, with their county governments in Colorado, for instance, to try to bring this science and apply it to the needs of each locality. So it's really a value-added tool that's relevant at multiple scales and across a wide range of the country.
We had a question from Marilyn Orlowski, who asked the question I think you just answered: is TNC working with any other states on additional biomaps? And it sounds, Andy, like the first step is the conversation that's happening across the Nature Conservancy with people who now have access to our data, helping them think about how to bring it to their state agencies. So aside from Vermont, though, I assume there's others who have partnered with the Nature Conservancy to develop their own biomaps. Are you aware of that?
Well, as Eve said, we're a bit out in front in Massachusetts, and we're proud of that.
Yes.
I will say that I've heard stories of not necessarily a biomap, but different types of relations, because every state is in a different place. For instance, Eve mentioned the State Wildlife Action Plan, the SWAP, and our Tennessee colleagues worked hand in hand with their state agency to build these data and this information into their State Wildlife Action Plan. So it looks a little different in each state, but we do have those collaborations across the country.
Alan Medville asks, is BioMap useful for landowners and local land conservation and land trust organizations? I know in Massachusetts it really has been, hasn't it, Andy? I mean, you've seen it, and I guess Eve, you as well from your position.
So I'll just real quickly, after the second BioMap was released in 2010, and you want to know that your product is being used, I took a field trip and I was out in a remote sanctuary of Mass Audubon in Western Massachusetts, and I walked into the men's room and there was the BioMap poster right on the wall. So, yeah, it's being used not only in men's rooms but beyond, but especially for those local small land trusts who don't have the capacity to develop this kind of science. It's a very valuable tool, and it's linked with public agency funding sources. And now that we've got these local additions, this real innovation, I think that's one of the biggest innovations of this current BioMap. It's even more relevant for local land trusts.
Yeah, that's super good. So maybe to build on that, Eve, Vanessa Johnson Hall asks, can you explain the relationship between local priorities and statewide priorities for landscape conservation? Vanessa says she would have assumed that local would be a subset of state, but it's clearly not. Is that clear to you too?
So it's a good question. So I think the best way to explain it is, and I'll use the rare species example again, but for the various components is there are priority areas when we're looking at conserving those rare species across the Commonwealth, and those would be the statewide level priorities. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't additional areas that are important when you're looking more locally. So it's not that they're necessarily a subset, it's that they're in addition to. So when you zoom to your municipality, for example, additional areas will be identified that while they're not rising to the level of a statewide priority, they're still important for conservation of that particular element component, let's say rare species, within the boundaries of your municipality. So when you're looking at the local data, that if you have statewide priorities within your municipality, those will be there as well, but there will be additional areas that are added so that you can work on more local conservation.
And I would suggest that locally, you conserve for a whole variety of reasons. And the ecological reason is one of them. Cultural is another. You may have a place that is precious to you because of the history of the town. And it just doesn't happen to be connected or have rare species, but it's really special for the identity of the town or public recreation or outdoor health. And so this is not the only, BioMap is not the only way we value land. There's lots of other reasons to conserve. So that may be kind of what you're asking too. So this is one important framework from our perspective in terms of protecting biodiversity. That's what we're looking at, but there's a lot of other reasons why you might want to conserve. We've gotten we had a whole host of questions on the controlled burn, so I'm going to ask them, even though it's super specific. People always worry about the animals. So what happens to all the wildlife in a 60-acre burn area? And Bodke asks, Susan Parmenter says, I'm curious, when a managed burn is performed, do you see any wildlife exiting the burn area? I know it's good for habitat, but what do critters do in the moment? I think we're all remembering those Wild Kingdom, films where you see all the animals on the savannah running ahead of the fire. Do we see something like that too?
Not quite that dramatic, but you will sometimes see some wildlife leaving the area. In terms of impacts, we recognize that there may be some short-term impacts, but it really is about taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture and making sure that we're maintaining these habitats for these species in the long term. We do some efforts, for example, in some areas where we know there may be high concentrations of turtles, for example, we'll sweep the area ahead of time so that we don't have a large, mortality or something to that effect. But this type of work, fires in these habitat types, have been in place for years and have been suppressed more recently. And so, we see changing habitat, which ultimately will lead to loss of those species. So trying to set the clock back a little bit and make sure that we're maintaining these open habitat types is really critical in a state like Massachusetts. I believe we're like the 8th most forested state or something to that
it's
effect.
Amazing,
So,
right? It's
yeah.
surprising.
So we don't want to lose sight of the bigger goal in the picture. And while there may be some impact, it's long term that we're looking at.
So we do think of things like ground nesting birds and try to not do the burn when they're still
time of year is important in terms of when the work is done as well.
Yeah. So for folks who are watching, this Martha's Vineyard burn, what it did is it destroyed a lot of the invasive species that were taking over, and in the seedbed were a lot in the soil were dormant seeds of some of the natural grasses and native plants. So, and then of course there was also some seeding to help restoring, to restore the more of a natural habitat. And so that was interesting to me when I learned it, that it'll burn off some of these invasives. So it's a way to deal with invasive control that's at a scale you can't do by hand, whatever. And of course, pesticides is complicated. So it really is, it's important. There was a sad question, and now I don't remember who asked it, is, do we ever give up on a species? Is there ever a species that's so endangered that we just take it, like maybe we leave it on the list, but we don't actually manage for it? And I'm actually wondering, in the context of climate change, as ranges change, could be that something might be endangered here, but is not endangered elsewhere. And we know that ultimately it's Massachusetts won't be the place because we're going to be too warm or too cold or whatever, depending on where it is on the range.
So I guess I wouldn't put it as that we give up. I guess what I would say is there have been instances of, extinction in the Commonwealth, despite best efforts, or maybe not even realizing until it was too late. There's a lot of famous examples of that. It is true that there are species that are listed here that are relatively common in other parts of their range. And so we do monitor that, and we do work closely with our partners as well as the other states within our region, and coordinate efforts on recovery. And we are seeing range shifts with climate change. And so that definitely leads into our recovery plans and our thinking. And we, just so everybody knows, we do reevaluate our endangered species list. Per statute, we're supposed to do it every 5 years, but we tend to do it every 2 to 3 because we are seeing such, so much change. So we do reevaluate, and things do come off the list because they start improving, or unfortunately, maybe they've been extirpated. But then there are things that, are added to the list as well. So.
Well, as we talk about like this range shift, that's the whole reason why we need this connected and resilient landscape. So as range shift, there's a place to go.
Exactly.
And so, that's BioMap. There you go. And Andy, there's a question from Margarita Pryor about Rhode Island that I thought you might have some idea on, maybe not, but try me. Margarita asks, how porous are the Massachusetts state boundaries for purposes of looking at habitat in Rhode Island? I.e., could we get some insight about the state of habitats and species in Rhode Island if we looked right over the border from Massachusetts?
Yeah,
and are we connecting and coordinating them with them?
Well, it's a perfect question following that range shift question and the regional perspective. Because first of all, we're building this regional connectivity component in that we didn't talk about. It's also from our Nature Conservancy analysis that shows the areas as they move right through Massachusetts into the states north and south of us. But the borders are very porous. Wildlife, plants, animals have no idea where we've drawn our state boundaries.
Wait a minute.
And they don't care, and they shouldn't. So a lot of the data we're using are actually available at multiple scales. So we've got these resilience data, we've got ecological integrity data. All of those are available at these regional scales that we can look at, and we look at the borders to make sure we're not missing something where there's a big forest core right on the other side of the border that bleeds into Massachusetts and vice versa. So yes, we're really thinking at that regional scale. And then each state has a similar heritage program to Eves and has data collected there. So we really think and act regionally as well as within the boundaries of Massachusetts.
And as a practical matter for folks listening, when the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts is thinking about a project like a restoration project or a preservation, a conservation project, we look across the border because, right now we're working on a great conservation project that's on the border of Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And we're working with New Hampshire on the Merrimack at a restoration that it crosses the border. We're always looking, on the western side of the state where we work very closely with Connecticut and so forth. So that is the benefit of having a conservation organization that is national and global, working on some of these issues.
I can just add to that too, that at MassWildlife, we do the same thing. We have ongoing restoration efforts where we work jointly, for example, with Connecticut on one of the largest grasslands that's remaining. And the data that we collect in Massachusetts, it's the same birds that go back and forth. And that informs how we manage, and we have longstanding agreements with neighboring states to manage these areas appropriately. So very similar in that vein.
So we only have time for maybe another question. And so Patricia Taylor asked something. I think that will be a nice closing question before I have let you say some final words. Patricia said, and I apologize to everyone who put questions in. We got so many questions. I didn't get to all of them. My apologies. It strikes me that this map will help residents and agencies plan nature-based responses to the climate crisis. Will BioMap have a layer showing where those projects are developed as they garner funding and become implemented? And so I like the first part too. Will this map help residents and agencies plan nature-based responses to the climate crisis, first of all? And is there any way, will there be any way to collect information about that?
I'll give it a try. You know, I think, Deb, as you said, there's multiple values that people conserve land and waters for. And one is to mitigate the impacts of climate change and to help us adapt. There's going to be a lot of overlap between these habitats, but I think we sometimes will need some additional information to inform where we can reduce flooding on a community and that kind of thing. And so that the intersection of BioMap data with information like that will be very helpful. We do track what projects are protected really well in Massachusetts, and that's going to be part of the data that you're going to see when you go to the BioMap website, is what's been protected and what's unprotected. So that would be my quick answer.
That's great. Do you have anything to add on that, Eve, before we start to wrap up?
Yeah, I would add that there are several data sets that identify priority projects when it comes to potentially to infrastructure, like culverts that need to be replaced and dams that need to either be repaired or removed. And we work closely with our sister organizations like the Division of Ecological Restoration to help prioritize those. So while they won't be in BioMap per se, those are overlays that can be added over time to look at, you know, how well are we meeting those targets and help prioritize all that work as it relates to some pretty critical infrastructure projects.
That's great. Well, I want to thank you both. First of all, Andy, it's always a pleasure hearing you talk and share your passion about this work with us. And Eve, it's just such a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you too.
So much about you, and I think you've got one of the best jobs in state government.
I tend to think so too.
How many of us get to have jobs where we actually get to make the world a better place, like actually do things that have that kind of impact? So thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your support of the Nature Conservancy. It is your support that makes all of this work possible. I know how much you love these webinars. We're going to send everyone a follow-up email over the coming days, and it'll have links to all the resources we talked about today and the things in the chat you may not have jotted down, but we'll send them out to you. Feel free to share the email with the connection to the video of this to friends and people you think might be interested in seeing it. It's not super secret, so pass it around. You can follow us on social media at conserve_MA on Facebook and Instagram. That'll help you keep up with our work and give you updates on upcoming virtual opportunities to connect. And on that note, please join us for our next webinar, which is Wednesday, June 1st at noon. We're going to be chatting with Mike Whitmore, land steward for the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, and he's going to be talking about the burn. So if you want to know more about the controlled burn, come join us next Wednesday. He's going to give an update on his work restoring rare sand plain grasslands on Martha's Vineyard. And he'll have information that he'll be able to show you the positive impacts of this recent burn that you saw at the Katama Plains and the nearby Katama airfield. He's also going to share some of his most recent research into the best techniques for restoring grasslands and give insights into how we work with conservation partners on Martha's Vineyard. So you're not going to want to miss it. Sign up today at nature.org/MA webinars. And I just want to thank everybody again for joining us, and congratulations on this really impressive product, which is going to be helpful for the conservation community, across Massachusetts. So hope you all have a good day. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.